So yeah, my name's Stacey. I started my first job at 18, and it was in a bookies, and I knew nothing about gambling before that really. That was where I was opened up to the gambling world, and it wasn't that long after I started. I'd always promised myself I would never bet, never go on one of those machines. I saw what it was doing to people, and I was absolutely adamant it wouldn't happen to me. Um, and then one day, me and my friend went over into another shop and we put a pound in and I won. And from that pound, my life just turned absolutely upside down. Um, One of the things I noticed kind of really initially was that I kept breaking my own boundaries in that I'd convinced myself I'd gone from nothing to a pound, and then I'd promised myself that I would never put a note in, but I quickly went from putting coins in to putting my first note in, and then I broke a boundary and saying no, this money is aside for rent or whatever it might be, and again breaking a boundary into going into that money. And I think looking back, that was an important thing for me. Um, my life was absolutely destroyed, and one of the reasons that I use the girl gambler for everything I do is that I was a girl, not only for the fact that I was female, but on my 18th birthday I went in and got a job and I knew nothing about finances or mortgage. I was just looking to go out with my friends and enjoy my life really. And so I think that that kind of highlights for me more as well the education that I lacked around what could happen or the dangers of what this could lead to, because the day before I turned 18 I wasn't allowed in a bookies, and the next day all of a sudden I was allowed to place bets with what felt like no limits. um from there I just continued to gamble more and more, and I knew that I was embarrassed, I was ashamed of what I was doing. I would move from shop to shop purposely, and I'd time myself in the shops to make sure that it didn't look suspicious until I was a 19-year-old girl going on a bus to the next town to try and hit as many shops as I could. Um, and the embarrassment and the shame kind of overtook, and that's when I found online, and the worst thing I ever did. But I was just a username at that point. Nobody saw what I was doing. They didn't know I was female, which was a huge thing for me because working in the shop, I never saw any women in there ever. And it just led me to further believe that I was the only woman doing this. And I lost everything. I tried to live on my own, and I very quickly didn't pay my rent because I was gambling and I had to move out. I was simple things that break my heart to think about now. I got a hairdryer for Christmas, and that's what I asked for so that I could heat myself at home because I had no gas. But I couldn't tell anybody any of these things because I was a gambling addict. Like this was horrendous. And I think kind of reflecting on some of the things that people have said in here, the first place I ever reached out was actually to Citizens Advice, because I was really worried about some of the loans that I'd taken out. It wasn't to say that I got a gambling problem. I was worried about my level of debt and being so young. So that was the first place I went, and things just continued to spiral for me. I got in massive amounts of debt, and again the feeling of loneliness and entrapment, the urges were so strong and I couldn't ignore them. I got to a point where I hated gambling and I would just do it to feel normal, to stop the urges, not because I even wanted to win any money, but just because I so desperately wanted to get rid of the urges that I was going through, to a point for me where suicide felt like my only option really. And I made a couple of attempts, and throughout the course of my sorry throughout the course of my addiction I did reach out to some places for help. It took a long time, but I did go. My first place where I kind of admitted that I got a problem was my GP. And at that point, I was told to refer myself for counselling, but not to say that I'd got a gambling addiction, but just to say I got low self-esteem. And that kind of heightened for me that, wow, like this doesn't happen to women. this is something that is completely unheard of. So I never filled the form in because I felt embarrassed. Sorry. I went to a GA group at the age of, I think I was 22, and I was surrounded by men much older than myself, and so again I never returned, and I kind of stayed on that path of gambling and hiding it. And the stories that you mentioned around affected others, I lied constantly to the people that I loved, and I didn't want to, but to me it wasn't acceptable to tell anybody about what I was going through. And I made a decision after I won a jackpot and I lost it immediately. And it was that point for me that I kind of recognized that no amount of money is going to make this better. So I made the decision that I would either go to prison or I would find a residential rehab. They were my two options. Sorry. And very luckily for me, I found Border Moody. It was the first time throughout the whole of my addiction, which was 8 years long, that I'd found another woman or other women that I could speak to, which was huge for me. That's where I felt safe. Bear with me 1 second, I'm so sorry. So yeah, and very luckily I went through the application process and I was accepted. And I remember having a moment kind of where I looked at these two women saying all the things that I'd kept hidden for so many years, and the relief, I just burst out crying. Not just to know that I wasn't on my own anymore. And from there, I did have a relapse, which I'm quite honest about, and I worked through it, and I kind of understood why. And from there, I've been absolutely gamble free, which I'm incredibly proud of. And I think the most important thing to me is that we have to deliver hope, because I believed wholeheartedly there was no getting better. I genuinely believed that there was no escape, and it doesn't get better. Once you've got it, that's it, and that's it forever. And that's why I decided to kind of share my story. I wrote my book and I started a couple of social media channels whereby I just share some tips, share what I went through, to let people know that they aren't on their own, women especially. And it's gone bigger than I ever imagined that it would. I think there's 86,000 people following the journey now, and in the past 3 months alone, I've had over 400 conversations with women and men who've reached out looking for support with the gambling. And as these kind of comments show, just a few of them, it's just the fact that they can speak to somebody who's actually been through it. I remember when I had my GA appointment, the first thing I asked anybody was, have you been through it? And if the answer was no, it was a real barrier for me in trusting them enough to know that they do know what I'm talking about. But my recovery has been brilliant, and the support that other people give me as well in knowing that I was never on my own is unbelievable. It really is. And like I say, the volume of people that come forward has shocked even me. It's unmanageable to a point, but we are, and we're getting groups together which have over 40 members a week now, and it's that element of speaking to someone and realizing I'm not on my own. I think one of the other things that I see a lot, and we've conducted a needs analysis with, which I'm sure the results will show exactly what I assume that they will, but it's about not only, I kind of use this phrase a lot, but I knew how to live with an addiction. I knew how to lie to people, and I knew how to tell your creditors the right things to get out of paying, and I knew how to avoid debt and all the other things. From being 18, I didn't know how to live without that. I didn't know how to manage my relationships or to manage money or any of the other things. I only knew how to live with an addiction. And so for me, a hugely important thing was learning to live without any of that. without not only the gambling, but without the lying, the immediate compulsion to lie and hide what you're doing, or managing a debt, or finding any kind of resilience, or it's all those things that I really struggled with. And what I believe on my relapse, it was my dad had suffered a stroke, and it was compulsively that I found something to cope with it.